I've had a lifetime with it.
Let's start, though, with now, my dad always says that one of his greatest resources was the Yellow Pages. He grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey. Born in Manhattan, I know. He has to. He's a New Yorker. Don't ever say it's fine.
No. When you're born in Manhattan, you have a lifetime credential as a native New Yorker.
Not that he's picky. But what it meant was that he had access to more than just the movie theaters near him, though you had some lovely movie theaters. He could go to the city. And the city led to the Theodore Huff Society. But also, there wasn't security like there is now. So start with Buster Keaton.
So my best friend and I would go to Manhattan, which was a very short bus trip, on any occasion we could. On almost every Saturday, numerous times during summer vacation, other holidays and breaks. We would go down to what was called Book Row on 4th Avenue, which was a string of used bookstores, where we could buy books really inexpensively. And we would hit some of the movie memorabilia stores, which were all run by very colorful and sometimes obnoxious characters. And we would have a good time. We would go to the revival theaters that were in New York at that time and start our basic training of seeing old movies. And one day, we were all set to go, and that morning, my parents had the New York Times delivered every day on our doorstep. I'm leafing through the Times, and there's an article with a picture of Buster Keaton, taken just the day before, said that he was filming a short written by the great playwright Samuel Beckett. And they were filming, I think this is the quote, alongside a dilapidated warehouse in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge. My friend Lewis and I had recently gone to a used bookstore and found a box of old movie stills for $0.25 apiece, just our speed. And I'd found a really nice shot of Buster Keaton, but I didn't know what movie it was from. It had no caption. So I stashed that in an envelope and took it along. And we took the subway down to Canal Street. And we came up to the surface, and it was mostly vacant lots. And about three blocks over there, we saw a few lights, not unlike that one, lights and reflectors. So we walked over there. And as Jesse said, there was no security, there was no trailer, there was no RV parked there. This was a very small operation, this film. And we noticed a car, and in the back seat of this four-door car, with his pork pie hat sitting on the seat next to him,
You'd die, right?
reading a newspaper, was Buster Keaton. So I sort of poked my head a little bit in the side window and said, "Mr. Keaton?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, my name's Leonard Maltin. I'm a big fan. My friend Lewis and I were very, big admirers of yours and all that." And my icebreaker was, and I found this still, but I don't know what film it's from. Could you tell me? So he takes a look and he says, "Oh, that's parlor, bedroom, and bath." He said, "But that's not the gal I did the scene with. This must be a rehearsal." I said, "Oh." I said, "Okay." I said, "Would you be willing to sign it?" "Sure." Signed it with a ballpoint pen. And I tried to keep up a little conversation, but as I later learned, he was not, I don't know if he was shy or he was not the kind of outgoing person who would jump into a conversation with a kid that he had just met. So we sort of begged off, but we had our moment.
With Buster Keaton.
So that's a lifetime memory, a lifetime experience. Not too many years, and he passed away within the year.
It wasn't his fault, though, just so we're clear.
And we went to the premiere of that short, which played at the New York Film Festival at Lincoln Center, along with one of his classic silent films. And it turned out that just yards away from where we were standing was one of the other actors in that short film, who decades later became a close, dear friend of ours, our whole family's, named Jimmy Caron, who just passed away last year at the age of 94. Again, circles, circles and circles and circles. There are only 7 people in the world, I think, sometimes. You just keep, having wonderful coincidences, wonderful serendipity. And my life has been one of serendipity.
Where's that photograph now? Framed.
In a frame on my wall, on our wall.
Yeah, our wall.
And very, of course, priceless to me. And that was 1964. In 1972, Charlie Chaplin returned to the United States for the first time since the early 50s to go to the Academy Awards and be honored there. But on his way, he stopped in New York and was honored at Lincoln Center with a gala evening. And I got to see him just about where Jules is sitting in the back row. From that distance, so I can say I saw Charlie Chaplin in person. And that same year, I read that Stan Laurel had had a heart attack and was recovering at St. John's Hospital in Santa Monica. I wrote him a combination fan letter, get well letter, and I had read accurately, as it turns out, that he answered all his mail. And he had a kind of a photo postcard that he would send and personally inscribe, and I have that on the wall as well, a lovely little note from Stan Laurel. So
go into the Sparky one.
So, part of my story, my life story, whatever you want to call it, is one of good timing.
Good timing, but also you wrote a lot of fan letters.
Well, I did, but
you were active in it.
I was active at the right moment in time for someone who developed such a passion for that great era of Hollywood history. My early ambition was to be a cartoonist, not an animator, but a cartoonist. And
only one problem.
Couldn't draw.
Can't draw. Small issue.
Had I taken art lessons, I think I might have developed, but writing took over. But I did start out wanting to draw cartoons, and I did draw cartoons, and I have a rejection slip from the New Yorker and from the long-dead Saturday Evening Post, which were two the New Yorker being one of the last magazines that still publishes cartoons.
But rejected by the best.
That's right.
So
I wrote a fan letter to I wrote a lot of letters. I wrote a fan letter to Charles M. Schulz. There used to be a magazine, a periodical, called Too High Tone to be called a magazine, a periodical that was in every library called the Current Biography, where they published biographical sketches of people of note, all walks of life. And usually at the end of each of these essays would be a contact address. Sometimes it would be a business office or sometimes a manager, an agent, but it was a way of reaching that person. I wrote a letter to Charles M. Schulz.
if you don't know, that's the man who created the Peanuts, just in case anybody doesn't.
And I enclosed some of my cartoons. And he wrote back the kindest, most encouraging letter. Not a form letter. This was really personal. And enclosed with it was a signed original Daily Peanuts original panel strip.
Please don't break into our house.
And yes, that's on. Yeah, and yes, that's on the wall too. But this one has a P.S. 30 years later, I was hired by United Feature Syndicate, which is now called United Media, I think, his syndicator, to go up to Santa Rosa, California, and interview him on video for video that would accompany a museum show, a traveling museum show on Peanuts' anniversary. So as we were setting the cameras up and the lights, I told him that story of having written to him when I was 13. And he jumped out of his chair and he said, "We got to get you something newer." And he went over to desk and shuffled through some Sunday originals and found one that he liked. And he signed this one to my wife and me and signed it Sparky, which was his nickname to friends his whole life. So that one had a lovely, lovely postscript. But what I found is that the people I wrote to who wrote back, not everyone did, but the people who took the time to answer my letters or took the time to offer some advice or encouragement, that tells you something about them. It tells you something, I think, about their character, about their outlook, about who they are. And I've met so many of those people in the intervening years, and they've turned out to be what I hoped they would be.
The addition to the Stan Laurel part is I'm born on June 16th, which is Stan Laurel's birthday. We became quite close to his daughter, Lois. And she thought it was the coolest thing that, first of all, that I was born on her dad's birthday, but also that I cared that I was born on her dad's birthday. And she was extremely generous. And when I was born, so before she and I had any kind of a relationship,
She sent my wife and me, for Jesse, a keepsake. It's a check signed by her father, Stan Laurel, to little Lois's nanny in June of 1930. It's, just...
They sold that, but still, it was a very thoughtful gift.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. The books, you also, though, this is where being a neurotic Jew does pay off. He saved everything. So we do have big binders of his correspondence with different people. And in some cases, depending on who it is, you have them for years. There are some people that were quite a bit of back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, I was a diligent letter writer, not just to celebrities. I mean, I had pen pals all over the place. Some of whom are still friends today.
Yeah.
And it sounds so antiquated. Letters on paper. I've just been going through piles of these old letters, some of which are of no meaning anymore. When I was publishing my fanzine, got a lot of letters. Could I see a sample copy, please? Or I'd like to order a subscription. So,
What's the rejection pile you just told me about?
Oh, New York Times rejections for articles.
Yeah.
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 I have a number of those.
As I say, only rejected by the best.
Stuff like that. I'm
Stuff
just
like that.
sifting and sorting right now. This is my current pastime.
We're in the middle of revamping our YouTube channel, and we've decided that one section is going to be called I Forgot I Had That, because this is a game we play daily where my dad's going through stacks of stuff, and then, I forgot I had that. And it's like if you were drinking, you'd be drunk by the end of this every time he says it. But there's just so much stuff, and it's because you started collecting a very long time ago.
I like to think I stopped short of being a hoarder.
Yes, it's clean. Things are clean. You can see there are stacks. I feel like that makes it not hoardery.
Yeah.
That's the excuse I tell myself, is that that's what makes it not hoardery.
But it's when I went to the I spent a lot of time, like our host today, George R.R. Martin. I spent an awful lot of time reading, and an awful lot of time at my local public library in Teaneck, New Jersey, which was walking distance of my house, and where the librarians were very kind and very generous with their time and advice and such. But when I would go and try to find books to read about early movies or animation or some of the individuals that I'd become interested in, there were very, very few books to be had. The first book I took out of the library was the autobiography of Max Sennett, the pioneering comedy producer, director, actor, producer, the man who discovered Charlie Chaplin and put him in movies. His greatest claim to fame, I guess. He wrote an autobiography in the 50s called King of Comedy, which is his nickname, or his sobriquet, King of Comedy. And I read it, and I loved it. I fell in love with this book. And so I returned it and then took it out again. and returned it and took it out again repeatedly. I never found a copy of my own to purchase till I was in my 20s. And by then I had found out that a lot of it was, shall we say, embellished. The truth was embellished a bit, maybe even fabricated in some cases. But what it did capture was the spirit of the time, how loose and how casual and spur of the moment movie making was in the earliest days, both on the East Coast where he started, working as an assistant to D.W. Griffith, and on the West Coast where he came and built his Keystone studio. The Keystone Cops emerged from that. And he really, really captures that. You come away with a real feel that I've stepped into a time capsule. And there was a Broadway musical done in the 70s called Mac and Mabel, which has been revived from time to time. And there's a great original cast album with Robert Preston and Bernadette Peters. And Jerry Herman wrote a wonderful score. And I had just started dating my wife when we went to see the production. And all through, she would turn to me and say, "Is that true? Did that really happen?" And
Can I just say 44 years later, she still does that with him.
yeah,
In anything we watch.
because they invented a story where they didn't have to. The real story would have been great just as is, but they know that the book is the weakness of that musical, and they've rewritten the book several times to no avail. But the songs are good. Mac and Mabel. That was the first book I took out. I was alive when the first book was written about Laurel and Hardy by John McCabe, called Mr. Laurel and Mr. Hardy. Kept taking that out of the library until I could afford to buy my own copy. I was alive, I was in, I think, the 8th grade when the first biography of Buster Keaton came out by Rudy Blesh. Took that out repeatedly. And I just found a letter from Rudy Blesh. I'd written a letter telling him how much I enjoyed the book.
Well,
So-
speaking of books,
Yeah.
give them the movie guide.
So you see, I got hooked on all of this very, very young. And having contributed to Film Fan Monthly in Vancouver for 2 years, I was now 15 years old,
Ancient.
and the editor-publisher of that magazine was now 21 and out on his own earning a living, and he wrote to me. We never met. He wrote to me and said, I just don't have time to devote to this magazine anymore, but I'd hate to see it go under. Put too much into it over these past 5 years. Would you want to take it over? Well, he had a subscription list of 400 people, and I barely scraped up to about 100 for mine. And he had them all over the world, mostly U.S. and Canada, but he had Australia, New Zealand, some readers in Western Europe. And he was professionally printed, none of that mimeograph machine nonsense. So I said, sure. And so I officially purchased it, but this is how the purchase went. He said, well, there's $400 in the treasury. I figure a selling price would be $175. So I'm sending you $225. So I started out with the treasury. And the magazine always paid for itself. Some people thought my parents, funded this little, hobby of mine. It always paid for itself. It never made money, really, but it paid for itself. And I did that. I took it over. I was in the 10th grade. I took it over and did it for 9 years, every month. And that includes editing it, writing envelopes to subscribers, stuffing envelopes, licking stamps, hauling it to the post office.
Going
The
up the
works.
2 flights of stairs.
Yes, all of that.
Because they didn't tell him that there was an elevator.
Yeah. So I'm about to graduate from high school. It's the spring of 1968. And an English teacher in my high school, who I didn't have for classes, but who knew me, stopped me one day and she said, I've got a friend who's an editor at Signet Books in Manhattan. I just have a feeling the two of you would hit it off. Here's his name and phone number. Call him and go to visit him one day after school. I think you'll enjoy meeting him, and vice versa. I said, okay. So I called, made an appointment. Now, I didn't know that this was going to lead to anything. Yes, in the back of my head, dreams, were forming about maybe writing a book someday. But this was just an introduction. And I went to meet him, and I brought copies of my magazine, Film Fan Monthly. And I was sitting there, and he said, I had them on my lap. He said, what did you bring? I said, well, this is the magazine I edit and publish, Film Fan Monthly. He said, oh, I love your magazine. Now, where and how he'd seen it, I don't know, probably through that teacher, or maybe it was when he was another publishing house. He had seen it there. He said, do you know this book called Movies on TV by Stephen Scheuer? I said, of course I do. It was the only book of its kind, a paperback book with thousands of little capsule movie reviews. I knew it inside and out. He said, you know what? I said, by heart, I use it every single day. Because in those days, local television stations showed movies almost nonstop. Early morning movie, the noontime movie, late afternoon movie, the $1 Million Movie, the late show, the late late show, all of that. Local television. He said, do you like it? I said, I like it as far as it goes. He said, well, what would you do differently? Well, I just started rattling off ideas. I said, well, he only gives you like 2 or 3 cast names. That I don't know who else is in the movie. And he doesn't list the director or whether the film is in black and white or color, which mattered more back then, or the running time of the movie. So you don't know if the local TV station is cutting it and, chopping it up. On and on and on I went. He said, well, how'd you like to do it? I said, do what? He said, I'm looking for somebody to do a rival book. You want to do it? I said, yeah, I guess so. He hired me on the spot.
He said he wasn't going to tell the people he worked with how old he was because he was 17. And we've also realized since that none of those contracts were even kind of legal because he was 17.
I was a minor.
So.
But anyway, he hired me. And he said, so what are you doing after this? I said, well, it was spring. I said, I'm going to college this fall. I'm going to NYU. He said, why? I said, I just gave you a job. I said, I know. I said, but I'm supposed to go to college? He said, well, okay. And I was kind of a straight arrow guy. If it says stand here, I stand here. Yeah. So I was supposed to go. I'm glad I went. Not just because of education, but because of the socialization, because of the opportunity to work on a daily newspaper, which we had at NYU. Some wonderful teachers in the journalism department who just were all working journalists and told war stories that were much more valuable than anything you could read in a textbook. Anyhow, so I got busy. I had to hire people to help me do this book. And Patrick said to me, try to have some money left over when you're done. It was good advice, which I didn't fully heed. But the first thing I bought was my new...
No. I don't know how old I was when I realized how young he was when he started doing stuff. But I said to him, what did you buy when they gave you money for the movie guide? Because imagine you're 17/18 years old. What would you have bought if someone gave you $10,000? Everything, right? It would have been like, I am running around, I'm buying anything I want, I'm being frivolous. Then there's him.
I bought an IBM Selectric typewriter.
Wild man.
The Cadillac of typewriters.
Wild man. And I looked at him, and I remember, do you remember this? I looked at him, and I said, you bought a typewriter. That's great. Did you buy anything else? Yeah, I did, yeah. Your whole collection.
Big collection, a run of Motion Picture Herald, great trade magazine. I bought a complete run from the 1930s, my favorite decade.
And we still have it, but to this day, I just say, you didn't do anything stupid with it? No, he didn't.
Nope, sorry. I'm an eternal disappointment to my daughter.
You're just wonderfully square, and we love that about you. Mommy and I love that you are our square. It's okay.
Anyhow, the book came out when I was in my freshman year.
Like all the other kids in freshman year, right? Yeah. This is my book.
But it opened the door to this publishing house, and I pitched them other ideas, and they took one, and I wrote my second book called Movie Comedy Teams. And when summer was coming up 1 year later, I said, I ought to try to pitch another book. And my mentor had left the company by then, but I had another editor. And I said, I've got this idea, and that idea. She said, no. She said, but we're looking for a book about cameramen. I said, cameramen? She said, yeah. Well, I don't know anything about cameramen. But then I thought about it for a couple of weeks, and I thought, well, who am I to turn down an offer from a publisher to do a book? So I found a wonderful book that had just recently been published called Two Reels and a Crank. It was written by two silent film pioneers who told their stories in alternate chapters. Great reading. And then I asked one of my mentors, William K. Everson, great film scholar and teacher. He said, if you go out to L.A., you go to the ASC, the American Society of Cinematographers. They have what they call a clubhouse. And all the old-timers hang around there, and they love to talk.
This is true to this day, by the way. If this is something that interests you, they're there, and they're an incredible resource and the loveliest people.
Yep. So I didn't want to go out blind. I called and I talked to the president of the ASC, the then president of the ASC, a man named Arthur Miller, no relation to the playwright. And Arthur Miller was a 3-time Academy Award winner. His first credit, or one of his first credits, was shooting The Perils of Pauline with Pearl White in 1914. He went on to win Oscars for shooting How Green Was My Valley, Anna and the King of Siam, Fox movies in the 40s. And I forget what the third one is.
What you've listed is enough.
Yeah.
That's...
Anyway, he said, come on out. Come on out. I'll set you up with other guys. Yeah. And I did go out, and I had a 2-week crash course in the history of cinematography, thanks to him and some other very generous people. And that book has stood me in good stead. I've had several prominent cinematographers tell me that this is what first got them interested in doing what they do today. What an incredible compliment.
A lot of film schools, too. A lot of film schools use
the most
it.
flattering thing that anyone could say. And then about 10 years ago or so, the ASC gave me an honorary award all those years later. So all those cliches are true about when opportunity knocks, you have to be ready to go through the door. You have to be prepared. You have to deliver the goods. All that's true. But I also had good luck and good timing. And you can't discount those things.
No, but then you were also very smart and you got yourself an Alice.
Well, yes. I married well.
Yes. She'll tell you. No, my mom is the business side of everything. So I call us the Maltin Empire. We are mighty and we are 3 people. Now my husband, unfortunately, he didn't know what he was signing up for.
Not your husband, unfortunately.
My husband, unfortunately for him, did not know what he was getting into as he's sitting there now staring at me like, shut up, wife. So my mom is the business. My mom is the one who is in charge. She's the boss. And the motto of our home is, if Alice ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. But that all comes from her overhearing my dad trying to get paid.
So I got married. People, before they met her, said, does she like movies? I said, how could I marry somebody who doesn't like movies?
People ask us that now. People ask me that. People ask my mom, do you guys like movies? No. Can't stand him.
We love going to the movie. We hold hands at the movies. We love watching movies together, old and new. And when we got married, we were living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and I was a freelance writer, which can be, wonderful when it's going well and not so wonderful when it's not going well. And one December, I had sold a lot of articles, including a memorial piece on Charlie Chaplin, who died on Christmas Day, I believe, 1977. I think that's right. I hope that's right. And, but I wasn't getting paid. Nobody was coming through with checks. So January was a very fallow month. And I worked at home in our apartment. And Alice overheard me on the phone trying to cajole my fees out of these various magazines and newspapers, and not doing very well. And she had worked in the credit department at Bantam Books, and also came from a family. Her father was a master negotiator, fancy term, in Yiddish, handler.
Yes.
So Alice knew what was what, and she said to me, "That's not what you should say. You should say this. Phrase it like this, and that way they can't say no, blah, 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 blah." And I got very defensive. And I said, "Well, you're so smart. Why don't you do it?"
Ding.
And then we both had this moment, this epiphany. And we said, "Well, yeah, why don't you do it? That's what you do well, and I do badly."
And you've remained terrible, and she's remained great, and here we are.
Yep.
So, still yelling at him when he tries to do it for himself because it just doesn't go well.
But that was a turning point in our relationship, and a very good and fruitful turning point. And we lived happily ever after.
It's true. And then, and then me. Then Entertainment Tonight.
Oh, so first off, how can I give people advice who say, "How do I break into publishing?"
Yeah. Just have your English teacher talk to a publisher, and then bring you in when you're 17, and make sure they don't have you sign a terrible contract.
So I continued writing books and doing what every author tries to do, get on TV and radio shows to promote them. And I was very lucky to get on the Today Show, which then, as now, is a great forum, great platform. I was promoting a book called The Great Movie Comedians, and Gene Shalit, their longtime movie critic and entertainment reporter, was interviewing me, and we had a very loose, lively, funny conversation. 3,000 miles away, unbeknownst to me, there was somebody at Paramount Television in Hollywood who saw that segment and called the man who had just been installed as the new executive producer of this struggling TV show called Entertainment Tonight, which had already been through 3 producers.
But it had only been on for a very short time.
Yep. And he called the new guy, who was a legendary newspaper editor, who was dipping his toe into the waters of television. He said, "You're looking for a film critic, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I just saw a guy on the Today Show. I think you ought to check him out." So our phone rings a couple of days later. Alice answers the phone. "Hi, may I speak to Leonard Maltin?" She says, "Who may I say is calling?" He says, "Bruce Cook from Entertainment Tonight." She said, "May I ask what it's in reference to?" He said, "Employment." And she said, "Yours or his?" He said, "His." She said, "Good, I'll put him right on." And so he asked if I'd be willing to put myself on tape. We didn't discuss what kind of story I'd be doing, feature story, anything at all. Would I be willing to fly out to L.A.? Sure. When? Tomorrow? That's how television works.
Yeah.
I flew out to L.A. with the worst cold I've ever had, but I wasn't going to say no. Got on the plane, went to see the studio, which was then on Vine Street near Sunset and Vine in Hollywood, and they took me to meet the new boss, who said to me, Now, you know, we brought you out here to do movie reviews. No one told me that at all. But I remembered at that moment, my moment of clarity, flashed back to those books like Max Sennett's book, where in the silent movie days, every day, every morning, there'd be a little crowd outside the studio, and the assistant director would come out and say, all right, can you ride a horse? And of course you said yes, because you wanted to make $5 a day. Otherwise, you'd make $3 a day just to be part of a crowd. So when he said, so can you do 2 movie reviews for us tomorrow morning? I said, yes, sir. And I had seen 2 movies at advanced screenings and was equipped to do it, but he put me together with a segment producer who taught me how to format a review for television and how to do it for the ear, not to read, but to be heard. And the next morning, I taped 2 reviews, and they seemed to go well. And the line producer of the show, very nice man, said, well, if it was up to me, I'd hire you right now. But it's the Paramount executives who have to pass muster. But I'm sure we'll hear from them soon. They want to get on this. Okay. So I flew home. That was Thursday. Friday, Memorial Day weekend. Friday, I flew to a film buff convention in Columbus, Ohio. Alice and I flew there together. And on Saturday, I was in the dealer's room looking at movie stills. And a guy says to me, oh, you're good on TV last night. I said, what? He said, yeah, I was flipping channels and I saw you on TV last night. I said, doing a movie review? He said, yeah. Now it's the weekend. There's nobody to call to find out what was going on. And it was a holiday week, Memorial Day weekend to boot. When we got home on Monday, our answering machine, which was then a reel-to-reel tape machine, was full with people who had seen me. Friends, relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all sorts of people. And one friend said, they actually introduced you as their new movie critic. So Tuesday I called Los Angeles, said, does this mean I have the job? They said, no. We're still waiting to hear from Paramount, but we figured we had the review, might as well use it. And I had signed a piece of paper.
It was legal.
It was legal. I was going to get paid.
Ridiculous, but legal.
But they could have told me, right? 4 nights later, they ran the second review and didn't tell me. And again, the phone was ringing off the hook. And still, no job.
But my mother, being my mother, said, they're going to call you as soon as they need more reviews.
They're going to call you next week. I said, why? She said, because they're going to realize they don't have any more movie reviews, and they're going to want you to do more. And Monday, the phone rang.
Like the psychic she is.
The phone rang. Can you come out and do some more movie reviews? I said, when? They said, tomorrow? I said, no. He said, why not? I said, I haven't seen any movies. Oh, well, could you get out like by the end of the week? I said, yeah, I'm sure I could do that. And that's how I worked for them for about a year.
Though we do say, if it started like that, we really shouldn't have been surprised by what it was like the rest of the 30 years.
Yes. If it's crazy before they've hired you, you can't complain about being surprised that it's crazy all the time. And it was crazy.
It was
but
crazy.
again, if somebody says to me, how do I break into television? What am I supposed to tell them? I've had just these, wonderful circumstances, turns of events. And Entertainment Tonight changed my life in so many ways. I commuted back and forth for a year and a half from New York because my wife and I weren't going to give up our life there on a flimsy, promise of work for 13 weeks. But then it started to look a little more solid, and I was getting exhausted from the flying back and forth. And we were not used to being apart. We were always together. I used to work in our apartment at home. So we moved temporarily, and that was 36 years
They forgot
ago.
to go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jesse's native-born Californian.
I am a true California, Los Angeles Jewish baby born at Cedar Sinai. I don't think my wing was owned by the Spelling family, but many of them are. And I'm the first ET baby of the whole Entertainment Tonight group, and they treated me like a little princess. And I was very, very, very lucky because they let me play with everything.
They were great to her.
Yeah.
They really were.
They let me hold the camera, and I genuinely thought I was filming the show. I was like, "Don't worry, I got it, guys. Don't worry, I've got this. You're welcome." Yeah, they were amazing to me.
And being with the show, and when I joined it, it was still pretty new. And when it found its footing, it became enormously popular. And you have to remember, this is 1983, 84, 85. There was no E! Channel. There were no cable channels, no satellite channels, no internet.
Color TV had just come in.
And no rival shows. Two of my bosses left, and one of them started Access Hollywood. The other one started Extra. But they didn't exist. It was just Entertainment Tonight.
Yeah.
So it opened all kinds of doors. And I got to interview and work with Betty Davis, Katharine Hepburn, Jimmy Stewart, on and on and on. Kim Novak, Alice Faye, Gregory Peck. The list just goes on and on.
Roy Rogers is a personal favorite.
Roy
for me.
Rogers and Dale Evans. Yeah. God bless them.
Yeah. Dale Evans came to my bat mitzvah. That's
She
a
did.
thing, right?
And so tremendous opportunities and tremendous experiences, all of which I cherish.
And turning to today, everything's different in a very big way. And folks, the reason he repeatedly says whenever, what do I say to someone who wants to do what I do? Because depending on what you do for a living, you have people come over and say, how do I do this? So someone will say to me, how do I become a film critic? What did your dad do? I go, you couldn't follow in his footsteps. It's not possible because it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist anymore. One of my favorites of his stories is that he wanted to interview Rube Goldberg, and he looked him up in the yellow pages.
White pages, Jess. White pages.
Forgive me. The white pages. And
He was in the Manhattan Phone Directory.
yeah. There were two Reuben Goldbergs. He figured that he lived, was it Upper East Side that you guessed was his?
Yeah.
He just took a stab. There were two. He got the right one. And
I
then,
met Rube Goldberg.
and how old were you?
14.
Because all 14-year-olds go, I think I want to interview Rube Goldberg. And then you call them on the phone. So this is not something that you can emulate. Entertainment Tonight, same thing. Be on a TV show when you're the only entertainment show around. Be it. Be the guy. Can't. So now here we are. It's 2019, which I keep forgetting it's 2019, but apparently it is. And my dad is doing things like YouTube. And we're doing a podcast. And
We co-host a podcast, a weekly podcast
Yeah.
called Maltin on Movies. And we have had, again, wonderful experiences. We've sat with Mel Brooks, with Carl Reiner, with Angela Lansbury, with Al Pacino, and with today's generation, with Jordan Peele, Amy Adams.
If that's my mother, tell her I'll call her back. It's fine.
Just,
And today, George R.R. Martin.
And today,
So,
George R.R. Martin. That's right.
that was thrilling. But we've gotten to talk to so many people, and we love it. We got to do Angie Dickinson recently, which was wild. Mitzi Gaynor, you name it. And oh
And then-
gosh, Norman Lloyd, Norman Lear. I keep saying that I do think we hold some sort of record for the oldest people on a podcast because we've had octogenarians, nonagenarians, and centurions. Because Norman was 104 when we had him on.
Mm-hmm.
Still, he's doing just fine. Trust me, he's
Norman
healthier
Lloyd,
than all of
amazing
us.
Man.
But you know,
Norman Lloyd is the man who's dangling from the Statue of Liberty in Alfred Hitchcock's film Saboteur,
yep.
and who later became the producer of Alfred Hitchcock's television series, among many other credits.
He was Alfred Hitchcock's right-hand man. Mm-hmm. And the stories, and then he played tennis with Charlie Chaplin. He's
in Limelight. He appears in Limelight.
It goes on. His stories are ridiculous. But so what we're able to do is interview people that we care about, which is to say a lot of the older folks who you really want to have them, you want to have the memories preserved. We work the TCM Film Festival, and the running joke that's funny but not funny, but funny but not funny, is they have to honor people quickly, because every year that red carpet gets a little quieter. And, you know, it's depressing, but it's true. So that's really been a big part of us figuring out who we're going to ask and who we chase down.
But we also get a lot of contemporary, you know,
Absolutely.
young people, actors, filmmakers, and
But
have a great
that's the
time with
part.
that too.
That's the part that is sort of what's fun about doing things for yourself. Going back to having a fanzine or whatever else, we decide who we talk to. We don't have anyone on we don't like. We don't have to pretend to like them for an hour. Why would we want to do that?
You know, the host of a daily or nightly talk show,
Yeah.
you know, they have to put some people on sometimes
Yeah.
because the network wants to promote a show or because they need to fill the hour. So they're not equally enthusiastic about every single guest who's sitting on that sofa. We are.
We are. Every week. And I've had to say on our show, I know that we say this a lot, but I love this person. It's because that's the only people we're choosing. But it's been wonderful. But this is sort of the meeting of two generations where, and even for me, I've got one foot in one and one foot in the other because I was raised by real journalists. Imagine that. By people who research stories, who do not say things like breaking and how fast, hot take. Like, you know, that's not what when I hear something, I want to research it because that's how I was raised to function, as opposed to just going, to anything, which is amusing but useless. And so we kind of get to talk to all kinds of different people. We'll be at Fantastic Fest in Austin, which we love, or South by Southwest, or Comic-Con in San Diego, or WonderCon, any of these. You're with all different kinds of audiences. You know, when he's at TCM, we know we can say things like Mitzi Gaynor, and everybody goes, woo! And I'm fully aware that there are other groups who do not know who that is. And that's okay, but our hope with the podcast is if you listen to us for Amy Adams, and, you know, whoever else we may be having on. We've had some of the Game of Thrones folks. We've had a lot of different people. We've been doing the show for almost 3 years, and it's weekly. And I think we've taken a week off or two, but really for the most part, it's been going. So my hope is that you will think, oh, it's really cool that you're talking to Natalie Dormer. It's really cool that you're speaking to this person, that person. Oh, I don't know who Norman Lear is. Oh, he's part of why TV is as successful as it is. Got it. You know, so you kind of have to make things easy. You have to make it easy for people. For you, writing has changed significantly for you because he's a journalist. He's suddenly having to say things like I. People want things to be personal. So when he writes a movie review,
I've become more conversational in my writing. And that was a result of writing for television, in part. And now I've become more personal, not just conversational, but personal, because that's the mode of the day.
It's what people like. They like feeling like they understand you, they know you.
Yeah. Who was brilliant at this long before I tried to do was Roger Ebert. And if you go online, he has his whole archive of reviews is available for free online. He had the ability to personalize his movie reviews and to refer to moments in his life, the nuns who were teaching him, you know, adolescent years, his early experiences as a working journalist, things like that. And yet it never seems like he's doing it to show off or to draw attention to himself. It's always part of the fabric of the essay that he's writing about a given film.
Yeah.
And trying to do that myself, I can tell you, it's tough. And he was a master at it.
Well, I had you start. I'm my dad's editor. I run LeonardMaltin.com. I run Leonard Maltin and also LeonardMaltin.com.
It's true.
And so it started off with stuff where I would say, add something in that's not actually personal, but just sounds personal. So my wife and I. My wife and I went to see this movie. That's step one. And then things like my husband, he's the one who loves comic books, knows Marvel, knows DC. So I would make sure that if we didn't, especially if we didn't like something, I would have my dad add a line in somewhere and he'd say, but my son-in-law, who's a huge fan of the original comic, thought it was great. Because that way you're also sort of addressing that just because you didn't like or did like, you're not trying to take away from the fans. So it was small stuff at first, and now it's just little things where you may say something like, my wife hated it, or my daughter liked it more than I did. And people really, they like it. They like feeling like they know a little bit more about you. And that's also how the whole social media thing began.
Yeah. Social media. This they didn't teach me in journalism at NYU. And that's why Jessie is invaluable to me, because she understands social media.
I serve no other purpose.
I don't. So she deals with it. And it's and that's a blessing.
Yeah.
And I would say to anybody else in my profession, get a kid. If you don't have one, hire one.
Yep.
Find one. Just get a kid. They can figure all this out.
Yeah. It's
It comes naturally to them, where it doesn't necessarily come naturally to somebody who was trained to write a certain way, with a certain dispassionate approach as a journalist, or as an essayist, or as a critic. And if you don't adapt, you have to adapt or die. That's pretty much the way it is, which is why I'm happy to be on the air with a podcast, happy to have a website, happy to be utilizing these current modes of communication, instead of saying, oh no, I only write for publications, I only write for, I'll only appear on broadcast television. It's nonsense. That's nonsense.
The other thing, though, that's been a really big part of your life is my dad's been teaching for 21 years at USC, University of Southern California, and it's a class that he inherited. It's existed for
60 years.
Yeah.
George Lucas took this class.
Everyone took this class.
Ron Howard took this class long before I was teaching it.
Yeah.
And although I've had
Ryan Coogler.
Yeah, I had Alfred Hitchcock's granddaughter as a student.
Yeah. You had George Lucas's daughter.
George Lucas's daughter.
Yeah. Who very politely comes up and said, "Hi, I think you know my dad." What's your dad's name? George Lucas. No, I don't know who that is. I'm so sorry.
And it's been a great experience, because dealing with 20-somethings every week keeps me on my toes. I think that's the best way to put it.
At times terrifying.
Keeps me on my toes, and lets me know what's getting through and what's not, and how they respond to movies, and what doesn't get through that they don't understand or don't care to understand. And I've also learned not to paint them, not to tar them with one brush. I have 350 students in this big auditorium.
It's a big class.
It's a big class. So I don't get to know a lot of them individually. But I can tell you that some of them are sophisticated and some of them are not. Some of them are...
But they're also not all film students. That's really
from
important.
The whole campus. I have athletes. I have English
We
majors.
can always find the football team.
Yeah.
Back.
Well, it's not a traditional course. It's the official title is Theatrical Film Symposium. Terrible name.
Everyone calls it 466 because that's its
course
number.
number 466, and anyone who's been to USC knows about 466. And what it is every week we show a new movie before it opens theatrically. Sometimes it's a Thursday night class. Sometimes it's the night before it opens. Sometimes it's a week or two before it opens. Then we have one or more of the filmmakers there for Q&A afterwards.
But it could be sound designer, costume designer, you name it.
Writer,
he's had
director,
it.
producer,
Yeah.
actor,
Yeah.
casting director, production, any number, composer. And sometimes when we're lucky, we have several people from the film.
Yeah.
And
We had 3 out of 4 hobbits. We had 3 hobbits one year.
bless you. And I'm never bored because I learn something every week from these people. And I tell the students the opening night of the class, because we don't know very much ahead of time what films we're going to be able to get.
Or guests. Guests drop out.
The studios are usually cooperative. They're very, they know about this class. We've been going a long time. And they're usually happy to pitch in.
And now half of them have taken it. That's the craziest thing, is so many publicists we meet go, "Oh, Professor Maltin, hi, I actually took your class."
So I tell them on opening night, I can't guarantee that you'll like every film that we show, or that every film we show will be necessarily a good one. We try. We book based on the buzz, on reviews that have come out of film festivals, but sometimes they might not be good. But you can learn as much from someone who's just made a bad movie as you can from someone who's made a good one. And they don't believe me sometimes, then later they come to understand. And the first thing you learn is nobody sets out to make a bad movie.
Mm-mm.
The second thing you learn is they don't know it's a bad movie. How can they? They've just spent 5 years of their life with this. And someone says your baby is ugly, that's very tough. So a lot of what we actually learn together are life lessons, not film school lessons, but life lessons, and lessons about working collaboratively, and that if everybody isn't on the same page, headed toward the same goal, that's not going to be good for the movie.
You also always say, though, that your goal is to make them better moviegoers.
Smarter moviegoers.
But that's it. And so people who never thought about sound design, because you wouldn't, most people just wouldn't think about sound design. Suddenly they are. Or when a costume designer comes for a movie that's not a period piece. We had the costume designer for the very first Pitch Perfect movie. That may not sound like much of a job, but he had to create cliques. He had to create a college. He had to create a university. He had to create different groups. He had to create, I remember he went through this whole thing. When you walk through the quad and you see different people, even if at no point are they getting a close-up, he still had to create, this is where these people are, this is where these people are, this is where these people are. And so guests like that, they thrill me because the kids walk out and they go, holy shit, that's really interesting.
It can be really eye-opening.
We didn't know.
And for me, too. So, I just love it. We're starting to go on a bit, and I don't want to...
What are your questions, my friends?
What would you like to ask? We want to...
Yeah. It's a pretty small room.
What were the first 2 films that you did the reviews of?
The first 2 films I reviewed for Entertainment Tonight, one of was Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, Steve Martin movie. And I think, I get mixed up, I think the other one was Annie. Bad movie. Yeah.
I'm a Turner Classic Movie fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about your involvement with TCM, Robert Osborne, the whole history of that?
Well, Robert Osborne was a class act. What you saw is what you got. That's who he was. Genuinely, that's who he was.
One of the most graceful people I've ever seen in my life.
A very gracious man and truly knowledgeable because he loved what he did. And I'm very grateful to be associated with them. I get to host a number of events every year at their festival in Hollywood. I've even gone on location to do some interviews out of town with guest stars.
They do their On the Road TCM screenings, and he's done a couple of those.
And-
Eva Marie Saint.
And I'll be, this Tuesday night, I'm hosting another Disney evening on TCM. And it's a great channel, and we all love it.
Most overrated and underrated movie.
So many.
Overrated and underrated. Underrated is part of my life. I love shining a spotlight on neglected films. We just held our own film festival in Hollywood at the Grauman's Egyptian Theater. That was the theme of the festival, was films you should know that you might not. And one of my books is called The 151 Best Movies You've Never Seen. So I have oodles of recommendations. Did you see The Death of Stalin last year? That's a great movie, and so many people haven't seen that. But there's many, many, many others. Overrated.
All of them?
No. Well, I'll tell you one that gets me some flack. I was never and remain not a fan of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. I love comedy. But to me, that film was forced. And so I would call that overrated, but that's just an opinion. And as I remind people all the time, it's just an opinion.
I always associate that movie with The Russians Are Coming, because it's a big...
I have to tell you, I recently hosted a screening of The Russians Are Coming for the American Cinematheque with the director Norman Jewison and the leading lady Eva Marie Saint. And in watching that film, I was struck by how similar it is to It's a Mad, Mad, Mad. It's the same screenwriter, William Rose. Same screenwriter and several of the same cast members, too.
But it's a better movie.
Well, I think so.
Coming here, I think.
I think so.
I flipped through your table of contents, and Baba Hotep is in that book, which we've
It
shown
is.
here with the writer.
Oh, great, great.
Right? Other questions?
So you say you had good timing, and I'm wondering if that means that you think Hollywood is less accessible today, or is it equally accessible just in a different way?
Well, very interesting question.
It depends on what you want. Because if you want to write about film, if you want to write about film, if you want to review movies, there are quite a few things that are more accessible now. As I said, you could have your own YouTube channel and you could get a following from it. And a lot of people who do that can then get a Netflix show or some version of this. Now, does this happen for everyone? No. Does every waitress in LA get found and become a star? Usually not. And they're very angry about it. Every time you have a really angry waitress, we're always like, she had a bad audition today. Totally had a bad audition today. But if you're an actor, again, at the same time, Sean Baker, who made Florida Project, he found his lead actress through Instagram. Now, for these 7 billion people on Instagram, there are a lot of people who will never be found that way. But you could be. And so in a sense, it's more accessible in that you could tweet at a director you like and they might answer you. That could happen, and that's really cool. At the same time, because there are so many people doing it, it can be harder. For him, a big piece of it is that he was doing a lot of this when not everyone was doing it. So when you have a wunderkind, you have a young guy saying hi, calling the cinematographer, society and saying, hello, I'd like to come interview you. That thrills them because they think, oh, young blood, this is great. You can still, as I said before, you can still go, and they're still fantastic. They love talking to people. But is that going to be the case with everyone? The people that he cold called or the people he wrote letters to, they may not get back to you now because there's 12 billion of them. So it's harder,
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. What do you want to do?
I'm not sure. Writing, cinematography, kind of in between the two right now.
Those are good things.
Lady right here.
Oh, but I'm a mom of 4 kids, and I just wonder your parents' influence on you. Did they encourage you? Did you just have this humongous confidence in yourself, or blind ignorance, or blind belief that at 14 you could look at the white pages and call somebody and they're just going to, oh yeah, I'll come interview or accept a job to do this magazine for 400 subscribers at that age? And, I just wonder
Well-
if you had siblings and if they were as confident in what they do as you are, and the parent influence.
My parents were incredibly supportive, completely and utterly supportive. But they didn't initiate any of what I did. They supported what I did. I made them film buffs. They didn't lead me to it. It was my own discovery and my following my own path. My mother would say on a day like this, "It's so nice. How can you go indoors to watch a movie? It's so nice outside." I ignored that. But they were great. They were great. So I was very lucky. Not everybody has parents who encourage what they do. I did.
His dad was an immigration judge and lawyer. His mom was an opera singer and was on Broadway in the chorus. And she did love that stuff.
And my dad subscribed to Variety, and so I was exposed to the weekly Variety, the New York edition.
And his brother is a musician. He is a wedding singer in the tri-state area. So we meet people who say, "Oh my God, your uncle just sang at my wedding, at my bar mitzvah, at my, you know." So
they're sure, go ahead, give the guy a
yeah,
call. That's a good idea.
yeah. But he was also a golden child, and they did definitely believe that the sun shone down upon precious baby Leonard. So they were very supportive, and you could do no wrong. Still, they're gone. Still, can do no wrong. My uncle did not sing at my bat mitzvah. No, he just attended. No, my uncle didn't sing at my wedding either. Nope. We let him off the hook. But you never know.
I was in LA for the TCM Film Festival a couple of months ago, and I have friends that live in the Atlanta area, and the husband is the treasurer for TCM. He was in charge of collecting all the monies for the film festival. He escorted some of the stars to the showings. And it just occurs to me in hearing you speak, I'm so honored to be in this room with you, Mr. Maltin. I've admired you for so long.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
I really was very sad when Mr. Osborne passed away. I thought he was such a gift to all of us. And he was so sweet and so gentle in his criticism whenever he had it. He had a wonderful interview with Kim Novak, I remember quite clearly. It occurs to me that TCM does not really have a reviewer now for new film. Ben Makowitz is wonderful, of course, but he's talking about, snippets from old films that they show. It's my favorite channel on TV. I watch it at least a couple of hours almost every day. Had you thought about approaching any of the TCM people about being a current film critic? Because I think they really need that.
Well, I don't think that would be in their wheelhouse. I don't think that's what they're interested in, quite honestly. And I'm on call to them, and if called, I would serve. But I don't think that's something they'd really want to do. First off, I don't think they'd want to air any negative reviews. They're very positive. The outlook of the channel is upbeat and positive, and as it should be. And so I think that would be an awkward situation to be in. And if you can't be honest in a review, it's worthless.
With I would say, second-class movies that we see a lot these days. I start to count on Rotten Tomatoes a bit. Do you have an opinion on Rotten Tomatoes?
I think Rotten Tomatoes is a good shorthand way of getting a sense of how people feel about a movie. And I am one of the tomatoes. So as friends of mine and colleagues of mine lose their jobs because magazines and newspapers go under, they decide they don't need a critic anymore, or critics are irrelevant now in the age of social media. I keep saying, if you get rid of all the critics, you won't have any tomatoes. But I think it's useful. If you hear that a film has a 95% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, that tells you something. And if it has a 7% rating, that tells you something too. People who knock it because they say no. People who say that isn't how you should get your information, or it's too glib to go on the basis of that. Well, that was true when when Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert had their thumbs up, thumbs down. But that's just shorthand. That's just shorthand. Go to Rotten Tomatoes and you can click and read the full review. And then you have an idea about a critic that you happen to find yourself in alignment with, you tend to agree with, or whose writing you happen to like, and you get the full story. So you can do the shorthand or you can do the old-fashioned way.
And it is interesting to see the difference between the audience score and the critics, because sometimes it'll be extreme. And because we go to so many film festivals, we've been at festivals where everybody is, I think I'm pretty loud. I can hold it if you want me to. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. We'll go to a film festival and absolutely have the experience of Emperor's New Clothes, where we go, it was okay, and everyone else is like, that is the greatest thing you've ever seen in your entire life. Then you go home, and it opens, and you hear the mixes. You hear the one side of people going, that was a phenomenal film, and if you didn't like it, you do not understand cinema. Mixed with audiences going, I didn't like it. Am I a terrible human being because I didn't like it? We have it all the time. My dad was one of the few people who did not like my Asian weddings.
Crazy Rich Asians.
That's the one. He didn't like it. Didn't hate it. Didn't like it. I have not seen it. And it was a real issue because they went, but everybody likes that movie. He said, I liked it fine. I just didn't, it didn't wow you.
No, it didn't do it for me. And I happen to admire that director, John M. Chu.
I think he's great. Fun fact for all of you, when you do see his work, he loves Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, Gene Kelly, and when he films dances, so there he is doing Step Up, he was shooting head to toe because he believes that that's how you're supposed to be filmed. So here is a newer filmmaker who thankfully does love some of the older stuff and knows how to frame things. But you didn't like the movie. And the amount of crap he got for not liking the movie was plentiful. And you end up having to just sort of not talk about it. That's how we have to deal with things. There's another one recently. What did you not like just now?
Well, let's not go into that.
There you go. There's another one. No, but I would be interested. How
Well-
many of you saw Booksmart? Okay.
Booksmart.
All two of you. So, do you guys know what Booksmart is? Okay, it's the Olivia Wilde movie, and it's one of these where we were at South by Southwest this year, and it showed, and people came out of it going, greatest movie of all time, instant classic, which is a phrase we hate because that's not a thing. It's not an instant classic because you can't, anyway. But people went nuts. Then I had friends coming up to me going, I thought it was okay. It was good. I didn't think it was the greatest thing I've ever seen, but it was okay. Cut to, the movie opens. If you don't like this movie, you don't like women. If you don't like this movie, you don't support female directors. If you don't like this movie, and we're sitting there going, or you just didn't like the movie. Which you are allowed to feel that way. So did you like it? You didn't like it, okay.
Personally, I mean, I didn't not like it, but it didn't blow me out of the water.
Okay.
Okay.
And we have one other person who saw it.
I'm an older person, and I was laughing out loud. I
Okay.
couldn't believe it because I felt I was getting a picture on a younger generation.
Sure.
It cracked me up.
One of my mom's issues with it was she doesn't want the next generation to look like that. She was like, are we all going to hell and dying? That was her feeling watching it. And again, I didn't see the movie because whenever anything gets that kind of hype, I will just kind of wait because I don't want to watch something when it's to that level. But so there you have it. If you, being how old you are, you're a girl, all of that, if you walk out and say, I didn't like the movie, they're like, she hates women. No, she just didn't like the movie, and that's okay. So for him,
And as we repeatedly remind people, it's just an opinion. And it's just a movie. Some of the reactions we get,
yeah,
personal invective,
yeah.
hurled at me,
I didn't say your
you know.
mama. Like,
it's just astonishing.
yeah.
It was a question. It's sort of on topic for some of this. Do you feel that over the years that audience have become more discerning and sophisticated in viewing films, or maybe not so much?
In some ways.
I don't know. The audience is so broad now, so I wouldn't want to make a generalization. I think the kind of people who seek out indie films, foreign language films, documentaries, films made by filmmakers who put a personal stamp on what they do, they're a more discerning and educated and film-savvy audience. They're not necessarily the same people who are going to see the new Godzilla movie. And you can like both. There's no rule that says you can't enjoy both kinds of films. But
Escapism is very valuable, and we tell people that a lot. Escapism
but
is a good thing.
but I wouldn't again paint a broad brush and say audiences have gotten smarter.
We're going to have time for just a couple more. So
Yeah.
Would you care to share your take on your most underrated and overrated actor?
Well, no, I don't know how to answer. I'm not waffling. I'm trying to think of a good answer for you. Gee.
Some people get better. Keanu Reeves has gotten better, right? Like Keanu Reeves, it was very easy. I mean, his Shakespeare. That's still like an outstanding moment in film where you're just going, "Who thought this was a good idea?"
I can't think of an overrated actor. I mean, I get so tired. I get tired. You know, people. Some people they're bored with Meryl Streep. You're bored by excellence and versatility. That's sad. That's very sad for you. I'm sorry. She's so damn good at everything she does. Too bad for you. So no, you know.
Who's someone that comes to your mind now? Who's someone that comes to your mind?
John Wayne, Natalie Wood.
Oh, okay, so we're going back. John Wayne and Natalie Wood.
Underrated or overrated? Oh, John Wayne is completely underrated. No, John Wayne is underrated as an actor. No. I'm not talking about his politics. I'm not talking about his personal life.
That's why he's so popular, is because of his personality.
That's a different subject. That's a different subject.
It's a mediocre movie at best.
No, that's a different subject. And again, we're dealing with opinions and a difference of opinion. You watch John Wayne in Red River, or you watch John Wayne in She Wore a Yellow Ribbon, or The Searchers, and you see real performances. This old saw that he's just playing himself. Well, no, those are three widely different characters, which he did with great grace and validity, and none of them are like the real John Wayne. So he's not playing himself at all. So I think he's still somewhat underrated as an actor, leaving anything else that comes into the picture, that bleeds into the picture, aside. That's my 2 cents.
Who comes to your mind? Like, who do you think of when you ask the question?
I guess I would be looking for more modern actors,
Yeah.
up to date actors, maybe Gosling or people like that.
I think Ryan Gosling's a talented actor. I mean, I think, you know, there's no shortage of talent. There's no shortage of talent. What there's a shortage of is really good movies that take full advantage of the talent that exists. You know, there are a lot of mediocre movies and a lot of bad movies. When year end comes and people are making their lists and their award lists and all that, it boils down to like about a dozen movies every year.
Of the 612 that came out.
You know, and that's not a high percentage. So I would say that they're, you know.
A couple of questions here. Do you remember who, while you're getting ready, who one of the directors that said about John Wayne, I didn't realize the big SOB could act?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I love that there are podcasts and YouTube channels and things now, so there can be a more a more dedicated kind of form. So just like you're saying, you're not talking to people you don't like.
Yeah.
Do you ever check out the Gilbert Gottfried podcast?
I've
or
been on.
the- okay.
I've been on it twice.
We've had Gilbert on with us, and he's been on with Gilbert twice.
So it's those kind of shows, or even something like Joe Dante's Trailers from Hell. It's
So
that.
we had Joe and Josh were at Maltin Fest and did an episode of the movies that made me with my dad. And he did how many decades? Was it your whole life?
Like
No.
no, just past 100 years essentially.
Favorite movies from every decade. He did that, and that's out. That came out.
They posted that about a week ago.
Yeah, so that's there.
I was dorking out earlier. Did Joe Dante do Gremlins 2 also that you appeared in?
Yes.
That's why he's in it.
That's right. He did both. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you had a question, right?
I don't need the mic, that's okay. Yeah, are you, okay. No, I'm sorry, I got excited about the mic. In terms of modern criticism today, who are the critics that you enjoy and admire as artful writers and really complex thinkers who, not the shorthand, but the longhand approach to criticism?
Anthony Lane in the New Yorker. Justin Chang and Kenny Turan in the LA Times. Todd McCarthy in the Hollywood Reporter, one of the most sort of underrated critics in the country, and one of the most incisive. It's not a consumer publication, but it's available online now. There's no paywall barrier. You can read those reviews in the Hollywood Reporter. Todd McCarthy is great.
Justin is LA Times. Justin Chang is LA Times, and it's like poetry. It's incredible.
And I often disagree with him,
Yeah.
but his writing is great, and his thinking is great. Yeah. Yeah.
Justin took my dad's class with my dad as a teacher.
So we're going to wrap it up slowly, but one thing I saw is that you were one of the not so many critics that did like Scorsese's Silence, right? I thought yeah.
I thought Silence was a beautiful movie.
A lot of people didn't know he had
Very
a movie
moving.
that year.
and I saw it under perfect conditions. They were racing to make the year-end deadline to show it, and they had a special screening for the members of the LA Film Critics Association at Paramount in their theater on the studio lot on like a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock. So I was wide awake, alert, focused completely, and I was utterly swept up in that movie.
Yeah.
And it you couldn't pay people to go to see it.
No. And Mommy liked it. So
Yeah,
in
yeah.
our house, something that we do find interesting is you've got 4 people now. My husband likes most things. In general, he likes movies. It's rare that he doesn't, and so if he doesn't, it's a big deal. He texted me and said, I hated Venom. That was a big deal. So you have that. My mom is the most conservative of all of us, and she is very emotional. So if something is heartstrings to do family, kids, what have you, she will cry and come home and be very upset. She's affected by that. My dad is sort of the middle, which is that he's had to be able to watch ridiculous, nowadays, comedy that can push it way further than we want it to. And then I'm kind of like, I guess I can handle the most of the crazy because I've had to watch so much crazy. And a lot of my friends are filmmakers, so I have to watch whatever they make, and God help me. But a movie that I always reference to people is The Hangover. My mom, my dad, and I saw that together, and we all liked it. We all laughed. We all saw Forgetting Sarah Marshall together, and we all laughed. The scene that will stay in my mind forever is when he walks out completely naked to camera, and my mom goes, "Look, Jesse, he's Jewish," and I wanted to die. That was not my favorite moment. But that's the thing. So it is really interesting to me if they go to a movie together and come home and they either are complete opposites, which happens, or one liked it a little bit more than the other. But with Silence, especially just because you brought it up, they both had the same thing. They both felt like, wow, this is really something.
I think it got swallowed up in the year-end
Yeah.
movies.
And it was long, and it was serious, and,
Yeah. And a movie that demands complete
yeah.
attention. I mean, you've got to really focus on that film.
Yeah.
But I felt amply rewarded for it.